Um, our next guest, you might recognize him. He's a pretty famous person. You might have heard that he started CNN. His name's Ted Turner. Oh, wait. I'm sorry. I made a small mistake there. But none less distinguished, we have Jim Martin, who is president of the 60 Plus Association, which is a 15-year-old organization that has been called increasingly influential lobby for the elderly. Martin coined the term death tax in regards to the estate tax. He's a former Marine with a Bachelor of Science in Journalism. Martin was a Capitol Hill reporter while John Kennedy was president. In 1968, he was instrumental in hiring a 22-year-old Yale graduate named George W. Bush to work on Senator Edward J. Gurney's Florida campaign. Martin swims a mile daily, is a pitcher for a nationally ranked senior softball team, and plays basketball on 2 senior citizens leagues for over 60 and over 65. He was the leading scorer in both leagues in 2003. He competed in the Senior Olympics in the Louisville, Kentucky in June 2007 in the over 70 age group. I'd like you to welcome Jim Martin, please.
Thank you, Brian, for that introduction. And let me get to the Turner remark. My wife and I had a son in Atlanta a few years ago. When we would go down there to see him, we always got the best seat in the house. Of course, the downside was everybody expected me to pick up the tab. No, my evil twin would not be here today, obviously, because he's part of the problem, as I take it. It's a real honor to be here. Yes, I am a former working journalist, and that's going to be the topic of my discussion today. I enjoy playing basketball. I did go to Louisville. We play senior basketball, different age categories. I play in the 60 and below, 65 and below, and this year the 70 and below. It's kind of nice to compete in all these games. One of my kids said one day, "Pop, is that real basketball, 5-on?" I said, "Yeah, it's 5-on-5, referees." Real bad? I said, "Sure, when you see the video, that's not slow motion, that's us." So we enjoy that, but I started 60 Plus about 15 years ago. It's a counter to the 800-pound gorilla, AARP. And I appreciate that introduction about being an influential seniors group, and we've been called the conservative alternative to the AARP. They don't like that for obvious reasons, but I tweak them occasionally. In fact, I pulled out this old bumper sticker I had made up about 15 years ago. Maybe it's why they changed their name officially now. Legally, they're the AARP. They're no longer the American Association for Retired Persons. I came up with this one, AARP, Association Against Retired Persons, because quite frankly, some of their policies are not pro-senior, senior-friendly in my estimation. I'm also, I was recently appointed head of a National Defense Council Foundation, another organization, and quite frankly, since 9/11, energy security has become a national defense issue as well as an economic issue. And so we have an agenda at 60 Plus, a threefold agenda, if you will. We say, kill the death tax, don't wound it for the older generations, and we try to save Social Security for the young people, future retirees, and then for the purposes of this conference, we say energy security for all. At the outset, I want to be clear. I don't want to be branded as a denier of climate change. I understand this morning the New York Times has started calling us dissidents. I think that's a promotion. Dissidents, it sounds a little bit better, I guess, than denier. I don't think we're deniers of climate change. There is climate change. There is global warming. But there are multiple voices, multiple opinions, and multiple sets of scientific data that speak to this issue. My concern is that only one side, the catastrophic doomsday, the planet is in crisis side, is getting all the attention. Hysteria abounds, and wizened seniors say it's time to step back, take a deep breath, and work together. And I want to thank the Heartland Institute for sponsoring this conference. Their effort to help balance the record on what many now call this global warming scam is both welcome and necessary. I'm not a scientist, I'm not a climatologist, I'm not a meteorologist, but I have training in a science. I was trained as a journalist with a Bachelor of Science degree. And I emphasize science degree because it is a science. It's a science to report the who, what, where, why, when of an event, the 5 W's, if you will. But I'm afraid many of today's journalists do not have that training. Their majors may be social studies, literature, the arts, whatever. They're talented and capable writers, but they're not holders of science degrees. Old school reporters gave you the 5 W's. They left the editorializing to the editorial pages. Today's journalists, I'm afraid, all too often, in the interest of informing, cross over from scientist to artist, leaving their readers who are busy in their daily lives trying to judge for themselves what is opinion. I arrived in Washington back in 1962, not fresh out of college, but after two tours of duty, active duty in the Marine Corps. But I was a 27-year-old reporter with experience covering City Hall and county government. I covered Congress for 2 years, including the tragic assassination of President Kennedy. So I've covered politics up close and personal. Along the way, I discovered that the news business was changing, for the worse in my view, from a scientific to an artsy approach. I quickly discovered that the media was dominated by those outside the mainstream. I'm not making all this up. In 2002 and 2004, the country witnessed 2 close presidential elections. But did the media reflect the same mainstream voting pattern of the nation? No, it did not. A clear majority of the media voted for Al Gore and John Kerry over George Bush. Even more telling than that was in 1972, Richard Nixon roundly thumped George McGovern, but the media still favored heavily the South Dakota senator. And they strongly favored Walter Mondale over Ronald Reagan in '84, but Reagan also won by landslide numbers. So I've watched the frenzy surrounding global warming and climate change, often with detachment. But when I kept hearing from prominent and dissenting scientists that so-called global warming solutions would force higher energy prices, thus hurting most those who could afford it least, senior citizens on fixed incomes, I decided to get involved. And while I'm proud of my journalism credentials, I'm not a bit pleased with where my former profession has taken us. The reverential reporting by the so-called mainstream media leading to the Nobel Prize for his documentary, An Inconvenient Truth, landed the vice president on front pages worldwide, always with gushing tributes to his political and business acuity. But so many factual errors came to light that a British High Court ruled that Gore's movie, if shown in British schools, must have a disclaimer that it is propaganda, not a documentary. As an old school journalist, I don't recall the news media rushing to report these negatives encroaching on Mr. Gore's newfound fame. You know, seniors are not taken in by this global warming dust-up. In fact, their questioning reminds me of a great TV ad back in 1984 when a delightful 81-year-old senior, Clara Peller, intoned famously in a huge hamburger bun TV ad. The buns were huge. She intoned, "Where's the beef?" We all remember that, right? Well, the point is that phrase has joined the American lexicon to, in effect, question the very substance of an idea. So for this audience, I'm compelled to ask, where's the global warming? At least, where is it in relation to the hysteria that now surrounds this issue? Some recent overlooked stories question global warming hysteria. You've all seen them. Iraq saw its first snow in 100 years. China has its coldest winter in 100 years. Record cold in India. I could go on, but one of my favorites was the following, and I quote it verbatim. "Cold snap stops biodiesel green bus service, leading bus official to apologize to his customers. He said, quote, With the introduction of biofuel, our intentions were to utilize a product that offered a green and environmentally friendly alternative to diesel. However, he said, our priority must be offering a safe and reliable bus service, and until the problems of using biofuel in cold weather are overcome, we must return to the use of low-sulfur diesel. Well, where seniors really get worked up is on this high cost of energy. That hits them where it hurts most, in the pocketbook, because so many are on fixed incomes. Energy costs to them are palpable, and here I think I know a thing or two. I've testified before congressional committees on our country's great need for more domestic energy supply. In 2004, I spoke before the House Subcommittee on Energy, chaired by Republican Congresswoman Barbara Cuban of Wyoming. Last year, before the Natural Resources Committee, chaired by Congressman Nick Rahall, Democrat from West Virginia. I also delivered a speech that was published nationally in Vital Speeches. I think you have a copy of it there, back in 2000, entitled Seniors and Global Warming. I know the United States, I always say that seniors know that we have the wherewithal to be more energy self-reliant and less dependent on foreign sources. Shortly thereafter, last year, I spoke to the Western Business Roundtable and the Partnership for America at Capitol Hill briefings to express seniors' concerns over rising energy costs. You know, we all know that the U.S. is blessed with an abundant supply of energy, of natural gas, oil, and coal, king coal, if you will. But unfortunately, most are off limits to exploration because Congress, in its wisdom, has deemed it so. I implore Congress, as I always do in testimony, to do the right thing, increase domestic production by continuing to expand access to federal onshore lands and the Outer Continental Shelf, OCS. All are currently off limits. There's no shortage of product, we know that. What there is a shortage of political will to do the right thing, get out of the way and let the marketplace do what it does best. Partisan politics by the enviros, not content to acknowledge modern-day efficient technologists, keep us out of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, ANWR, where, as Paul has pointed out, environmentally sound drilling on 20 acres out of 2,000 acres out of 1.5 million could increase U.S. domestic reserves for decades. Partisan politics keeps our oil refineries, no new ones allowed to be built in 30 years, by the way, straining to meet demand. Partisan politics prevents the United States from drilling for oil off the coast of my home state of Florida unless we're 100 miles or more offshore. But we helplessly observe communist Cuba drilling for that same oil. Now, I've got a lot of military veterans down in my home state of Florida. They are incensed by this development because drilling some 40 miles off the coast of Florida, well, let me put it this way, that may seem like a long way off also. But with technologies today, with snake drilling and horizontal drilling being what it is, obviously you can drill much closer to the shoreline. I bet old Fidel must have gotten a real chuckle out of our bickering amongst ourselves, while Cuba, with the help of none other than China, taps abundant oil reserves for themselves that we are prevented from resourcing. Partisan politics prevents us from expanding nuclear power plants despite their unbelievably safe, unbelievably clean records. And partisan politics is what's at play in what has been called a perverse policy. It is indeed a perverse policy when we prevent ourselves from harvesting our own resources, but then we're forced to buy energy from foreign sources, often unstable. A few final remarks. At 60 plus, our national spokesman is none other than legendary entertainer Pat Boone. Pat is a gifted writer of a dozen books, as well as one of the all-time great recording artists, the original American Idol, if you will, and he's a Columbia University graduate, magna cum laude. Pat told me recently he's been reading about a guy named Dr. Fred Singer, and did I know him? Well, everyone knows Dr. Singer as a scientist of vast accomplishment. And Dr. Singer, as Pat informed me in an email, Dr. Singer begs to differ and differ deeply with Al Gore. Thank God for men like Fred Singer and others like so many of these distinguished participants gathered here by Heartland. Let me also thank my dear friend of 40 years, Congress on Racial Equality icon Roy Ennis, whose book, Energy Keepers, Energy Killers, continues Roy's extraordinary civil rights journey. Seniors see what's developing. Tax our energy producers. Let me tell you, seniors remember the 1970s and those long gasoline lines. What is past is prologue, and Congress should heed what happened when so-called windfall profit taxes were imposed. Domestic production went down, foreign imports went up. Seniors, for that matter everybody, paid the price at the pump. I've testified also before Congress on the need for more LIHEAP funds, Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program. And you know, it gets pretty discouraging, especially when seniors know development of our abundant energy resources would lower foreign imports and consequently lower their energy costs. Finally, seniors know that after this conference is over, we'll all read about how we're the villains, how we're the guilty, how we're the ones in denial. Well, I'll tell you what, if the media and environmental movement want to do something helpful, why don't they pursue mega-growth countries like China or India, where pollution, we're to understand, is truly harmful. But no, the U.S. is just too easy a target, I suppose, even though our environmental record is vastly superior to theirs on our worst day. For example, how many times have you heard our coal industry labeled dirty? Plenty, I'd wager, yet we've developed superior technologies allowing us to gather our nation's abundant coal resources cleaner than ever before. I know whereof I speak. As the son of a coal miner from eastern Kentucky, my father and grandfather and many uncles dug coal for a living some 60 years ago. King coal is our most abundant resource, and we should be encouraging its development. We should be encouraging more research and development, obviously, of clean coal. Clean coal now, but not as clean as it should be and could be. So I say to counter the sky is falling, folks, I recall the words of Viscount Moncton here at this conference. Responding to the question, is global warming a planetary emergency, Moncton replied no, that in his opinion, climate change is a non-problem, and the correct policy to address a non-problem is to have the courage to do nothing. Referring back to my going to Washington, I went there in 1962. Yeah, Jack Kennedy was in the White House in those days. Neil Armstrong had not yet walked on the moon. Strom Thurmond was still a Democrat in those days. So I've seen a lot of congressmen come and go, and I've seen a lot of public policy proposed. But in Washington, where con jobs are a daily occurrence, perhaps the biggest con job of all is that global warming is this impending disaster. It is a con job of the first order. So on that note, I suggest it's time to get on with the work we so desperately need to do, domestic production leading to energy security, I emphasize, for ourselves and future generations. I believe that where's the beef icon, Clara Peller would shout her agreement. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions if anyone wants to step up to the microphone, please.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Jim, I'm Bill Schroeder with Intermountain Rural Electric in Colorado. We're the largest co-op in Colorado. Our great concern is the price of energy for our customers. We're a nonprofit, as the co-ops are. So have you guys done anything on prices? I'll give you a hint, like what Dingell's proposing at $50 a ton will probably double our cost for kilowatt hour cost. Is there anything that your association's done to impact or show what energy costs could be to the consumer?
No, Paul, thanks for the question. No, we haven't. We haven't on a limited budget. We do not take taxpayer dollars as the ARP does, and so we are limited in our resources. But I would point out this thing that Dingell said. It reminds me of a few years ago when the senator from California, S.I. Hayakawa, the former San Francisco State professor, I think he knew he was going to retire after one term in the Senate. He said, I think we should throw another 50 cents per gallon gasoline tax in. That would solve the problem. Shortly thereafter, he announced that he was retiring from the Senate. A huge problem. Thank you.